By 1944, World War II had reached a decisive turning point. Most of continental Europe lay under the iron grip of Nazi Germany, and all roads to victory pointed toward Berlin. But the Allied forces understood that to truly defeat Hitler, they needed to open a second front in Western Europe, a direct blow from the West to relieve pressure on the Soviets advancing from the East. Thus was born the most ambitious amphibious operation in human history, Operation Overlord. The objective was clear: to send hundreds of thousands of troops across the English Channel, land them on the shores of France, and establish a firm beachhead to push into the heart of the continent. After months of intense planning and reconnaissance, the Allied commanders chose Normandy over the more obvious and narrow Pas de Calais, not because it was closer, but because it was less fortified. Normandy offered long, flat beaches ideal for landing craft. It was within range of Allied air support from Britain. Most importantly, it was thinly defended, thanks to one of the most successful deception operations in history, Operation Bodyguard. The ruse convinced Hitler that the real invasion would take place at Calais, forcing him to withhold reinforcements from the actual landing site. Meanwhile, the Germans had spent years constructing the so-called Atlantic Wall, a massive coastal defense system made of bunkers, gun emplacements, minefields, barbed wire, and underwater obstacles, all designed to repel any seaborne assault. But now, that wall was about to face the ultimate test. At dawn on June 5, 1944, after a one-day delay due to rough weather, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the final go-ahead for Operation Overlord. More than 5,000 warships, transport vessels, and landing craft departed from southern ports in England, setting course across the Channel in the darkness. Overhead, more than 800 transport planes and thousands of fighters, bombers, and gliders soared toward Normandy, carrying not only the hope of a liberated Europe, but also the steel resolve of hundreds of thousands of soldiers stepping into the battle of an entire generation. The mission was to secure a beachhead nearly 80 kilometers wide along the Normandy coast, divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. American forces would land at Utah and Omaha in the west. British and Canadian troops would hit Gold, Juno, and Sword in the east. The vital tasks on D-Day: capture temporary ports, seize key towns, especially the city of Caen in the east, and connect all landing sectors before German reinforcements could mount a counterattack. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a fight for the future of Europe. A fight between the hope of liberation and the brutal machinery of fascist war entrenched just beyond the waves. In the still darkness just after midnight on June 6, 1944, the first Allied troops set foot on French soil, not from the sea, but from the sky. At exactly 12:15 a.m., Pathfinder teams from the U.S. 101st Airborne Division parachuted behind Utah Beach to mark the drop zones for thousands of paratroopers that would follow. 1 minute later, on the left flank of the invasion front, 3 Silent Horsa gliders from Britain's 6th Airborne Division landed near 2 strategic bridges spanning the Orne River and the Caen Canal. In a bold and nearly flawless assault, 181 British airborne troops under Major John Howard stormed the main bridge at Bénouville, seizing it within minutes and stunning the German sentries. That bridge would later be renamed Pegasus in honor of the British airborne emblem. The second bridge at Ranville was also quickly captured. These 2 bridges were crucial to the eastern flank of the invasion, ensuring the Germans couldn't move armored divisions from Caen to counterattack the beach landings. By 12:50 a.m., more British paratroopers from the 6th Airborne were dropping across the Orne, reinforcing their hold. Meanwhile, on the western flank, the first elements of the U.S. 80th Airborne Division were parachuting near Sainte-Mère-Église, a small town that sat astride the main German reinforcement route toward Utah Beach. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., the skies over Normandy thundered with the sound of endless C-47s releasing more than 13,000 American paratroopers into the darkness. even with extensive training. The moment the jump doors opened, overwhelmed many soldiers. Below them was a black void pierced by anti-aircraft tracers and flashes from bombed-out German positions. Strong winds, low visibility, and enemy fire caused many planes to release troops off target. Hundreds of paratroopers were scattered across swamps, forests, and villages. Some landed in marshes, dragged down by heavy gear and waterlogged parachutes. Many drowned before they could cut themselves free. Others got caught in trees, rooftops, or dropped directly into German-held territory. One trooper from the 82nd Airborne found himself hanging from the church steeple in Sainte-Mère-Église, silently suspended above as firefights raged in the streets below. Throughout the German rear, small Allied groups scrambled to regroup. They navigated the unfamiliar terrain, located rally points, and launched hit-and-run raids against enemy strongholds. Sporadic gunfire echoed through the countryside as patrols from both sides stumbled into each other in the chaos of the night. Despite the misdrops and confusion, the courage and adaptability of the Allied paratroopers allowed them to accomplish key objectives. On the eastern flank, British forces established strongholds around Pegasus Bridge and repelled initial German counterattacks. To the west, units of the 82nd Airborne, led by Major General James Gavin, captured the vital La Fière Bridge over the Murderette River, though they would hold it under siege for days amid intense German assaults. By 4 a.m., the 3rd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment had liberated Sainte-Mère-Église, believed to be the first French town freed on D-Day. Further east, elements of the 101st Airborne had secured key crossroads and small bridges near Utah Beach, clearing the way for reinforcements arriving from the sea. By first light, more than 18,000 Allied paratroopers from the US, UK, and Canada were on French soil. They controlled most of their high-priority targets on both flanks of the beachhead. The eastern flank was secured at Pegasus Bridge, and the western approaches were open. Despite heavy losses, the airborne troops had achieved their mission: to pave the way for the main invasion force in what would become the largest amphibious assault in history. After the airborne forces completed their opening phase under cover of darkness, the battle moved into its decisive stage. As dawn began to break over the English Channel, an unprecedented sight unfolded off the coast of Normandy. An enormous Allied armada stretched across the horizon, anchoring just a few dozen nautical miles from shore in preparation for the main assault. More than 5,000 ships of various types, including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, and landing craft, were organized into task forces, each assigned to one of the 5 landing sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the warships took up formation and began lowering thousands of landing craft into the choppy waters. From the decks of transport ships, tens of thousands of infantrymen descended rope ladders into rocking LCVPs. Many turned pale from seasickness, vomited, or trembled from cold and anticipation. For these men, it was a one-way journey, and they all knew it. As the sky lightened, the first waves of preparatory bombardment began. At exactly 5:30 a.m., the order to open fire was given. A thunderous chorus erupted as Allied warships, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers simultaneously unleashed their naval guns on German fortifications lining the beaches of Normandy. From offshore, massive shells screamed through the sky and crashed into bunkers, pillboxes, artillery emplacements, and machine gun nests. Plumes of smoke and flame erupted across the coastline, some reaching tens of meters high. Overhead, waves of Allied bombers approached from England, dropping payloads on inland German defenses and beach targets. However, many bomber pilots, fearing they might hit friendly troops approaching the shoreline, dropped their bombs farther inland, leaving some coastal defenses largely intact, particularly at Omaha Beach. On the German side, though high alert had been issued, many units failed to respond in time. Some officers still believed this was a diversionary attack. Nonetheless, coastal batteries soon began returning fire. At Longue-sur-Mer, a fortified position between Omaha and Gold Beaches, 4 155mm guns opened fire at 5:37 a.m., nearly striking several Allied vessels before being suppressed by British naval fire. While artillery duels raged, the first assault units began approaching the beaches. On the far eastern flank, the British 4th Commando Brigade, accompanied by Free French units, made their way toward the Orne River estuary. They would be the first to storm Sword Beach. At 5:30 a.m., these vanguard troops climbed aboard their landing craft, gripping their rifles tightly, and began the final 7-kilometer run from the motherships to the shoreline. At the same time, a critical mishap occurred off the coast of Omaha. Due to rough seas and limited visibility, several LCTs released their amphibious Sherman DD tanks too far from shore. The result was disastrous. Most of the 32 tanks from the 741st Tank Battalion were swallowed by the waves before they could reach land. Only a few made it onto the beach, leaving the American infantry at Omaha to begin their assault with little to no armored support, just as they were about to face one of the most heavily defended beaches of the entire invasion. 6:30 a.m. H hour. The moment circled on every map, etched into every order. At exactly 6:30 in the morning, the first assault waves of Allied troops hit the shores of Normandy, launching the largest amphibious invasion in history. At Utah Beach, the westernmost sector, the U.S. 4th Infantry Division landed with relatively little resistance. Although strong winds and currents had pushed the landing craft almost 2 kilometers off course, what seemed like a mistake became a stroke of fortune. The new landing zone had virtually no fortified German resistance. Most of the defenders from the German 919th Regiment, 709th Division, were stationed inland, too far to react in time. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the only general to land in the first wave, made a decisive call. "We'll start the war from right here." Without attempting to reorganize, he ordered his troops to advance from the new position. Thanks to that bold move, American forces surged forward, overwhelming scattered German positions and quickly pushing off the beach. Within hours, elements of the 4th Division had linked up with paratroopers from the 101st Airborne waiting at key crossroads inland, establishing a firm bridgehead at Utah. But over at Omaha Beach, fronting the villages of Vierville-sur-Mer and Colleville, the scene was vastly different. Here, the Americans encountered the most ferocious resistance on the entire front. Despite a 30-minute preparatory naval bombardment, many German bunkers and pillboxes remained intact. The beach was defended by Germany's 352nd Infantry Division, a battle-hardened unit entrenched in interlocking fields of fire from the bluffs above. As soon as the LCVPs lowered their ramps, Omaha erupted into chaos. Mortars rained down from the cliffs, and MG-42 machine guns swept the beach with deadly crossfire. The first wave of American troops had nowhere to hide. Many were cut down before even leaving the boats. Others drowned beneath the weight of their gear. Within minutes, casualties surged into the hundreds. The shoreline was strewn with the dead and wounded, tangled in barbed wire, steel obstacles, and jagged beach defenses. Surviving officers scrambled to regroup, using shell craters and sand mounds as cover to inch forward. The beach echoed with gunfire, shouted orders and cries for help, all blending into a nightmarish soundscape. Later estimates confirmed that around 2,000 Allied troops were killed at Omaha alone, making it the bloodiest landing of D-Day. While Americans fought for survival on their beaches, British and Canadian forces launched their own assaults to the east. At 7 a.m., the British 3rd Infantry Division landed at Sword Beach, stretching from Ouistreham to Lyon-sur-Mer. Defended by the German 736th Regiment, 716th Infantry Division, the beach was lined with strong points hidden among seaside buildings and gun nests at Rivabella. Although German numbers were thin, their resistance was stubborn. With support from specialized tanks like Sherman DDs, AVREs, and rocket-equipped landing craft, the British gradually dismantled the defenses and began pushing inland. At 7:25 a.m., troops from Britain's 50th Division landed at Gold Beach, fronting Arromanches and La Rivière. The terrain here was rugged. Rocky outcrops and high bluffs gave defenders from the German 916th Regiment ideal firing positions. The first British wave drifted slightly east and ran into heavy fire from La Rivière and a devastating 88mm gun hidden on the flank. Using their so-called funny tanks, flamethrowers, mine flails, and bridge layers, the British slowly cleared the strong points. By midday, Gold Beach was largely under control, and British units began pushing toward Bayeux. At 7:45 a.m., the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division arrived at Juno Beach, near Courseulles-sur-Mer. Rough seas sank several amphibious tanks meant to support the assault, forcing Canadian infantry to advance nearly unaided against wire obstacles and concentrated German fire from the 736th and 716th Regiments. Casualties in the first hour were extremely high, higher than Omaha proportionally per unit scale. Still, with grit and reinforcements including Churchill tanks, the Canadians managed to overrun the strong points and advance into the town of Courseulles. Across every beach, D-Day was marked not just by scale, but by raw courage. At Omaha, amidst the chaos, Brigadier General Norman Cota, deputy commander of the U.S. 29th Division, led from the front, shouting, "Rangers, lead the way!" He rallied shattered units and drove them forward. Under his command, soldiers began breaking through minefields and barbed wire, crawling up narrow gullies toward the bluffs. Meanwhile, on Omaha's western flank, at 7:10 a.m., 250 elite U.S. Rangers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, landed at Point du Hoc, a 100-foot cliff between Omaha and Utah, believed to house German heavy artillery capable of threatening both beaches. Despite heavy surf and gunfire, the Rangers scaled the cliffs using ropes and grappling hooks. At the top, they discovered the artillery had been moved inland. Only decoy logs remained. But they soon located and destroyed the real guns hidden in nearby orchards. The Rangers then held the cliff for 2 full days, repelling relentless German counterattacks until reinforcements arrived. By midday on June 6th, the situation across the Normandy beaches had begun to take shape. At Utah Beach, the U.S. 4th Infantry Division successfully linked up with elements of the 101st Airborne, and together they advanced inland to seize the town of Poupeville, securing it before early afternoon. Behind them, waves of American reinforcements, artillery, engineers, logistics, continued pouring ashore, expanding the beachhead and pushing deeper into the Cottonton Peninsula. At Omaha, after the brutal carnage of the morning, American troops gradually pushed the Germans off key defensive positions. Small, determined assault teams scaled the cliffs, flanked the bunkers, and used grenades and flamethrowers to suppress the defenders from the rear. By early afternoon, the main resistance points along Omaha had been neutralized. From offshore, General Omar Bradley received the long-awaited message. Troops are off the beach and moving up the bluff. It was a hard-won signal, but Omaha had held. On the eastern flank, British forces at Sword Beach pushed nearly 8 kilometers inland, linking up with the 6th Airborne Division at Pegasus Bridge at exactly noon, just as planned. There, exhausted paratroopers who had defended the crossing through the night shook hands with troops arriving from the sea. Leading the relief force was Lord Lovett, commander of the 1st Special Service Brigade, who had marched his men directly from Sword to the bridge. The link-up at Pegasus became a symbolic moment, representing the initial Allied success along the eastern flank. Throughout D-Day, the German command structure remained paralyzed. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, in charge of Army Group B and coastal defenses, was away in Germany on leave. In Paris, Field Marshal von Rundstedt initially believed the landings were a diversion and hesitated to act decisively. It wasn't until the afternoon that the Germans launched their first major counterattack. From the south, the 21st Panzer Division was ordered to strike between Sword and Juno beaches in an effort to split the British and Canadian forces. Around 3 p.m., a column of approximately 50 German tanks emerged near the village of Perriers and advanced rapidly toward the coast. Some tanks even slipped through the gap between the two beaches, reaching the Orne River, where they briefly threatened Allied supply units near the shoreline. However, the bold thrust lacked coordination. Under withering fire from British anti-tank guns and repeated Allied airstrikes, the Panzer column stalled. By late afternoon, surviving tanks withdrew to their original positions. Though the counterattack failed to break the beachhead, it delayed the British advance toward Caen, the primary objective of the 3rd Infantry Division, which remained out of reach by nightfall. Across the entire front, Allied commanders now faced tough decisions, whether to push forward or consolidate gains for the night. On the western flank, General J. Lawton Collins, commanding 7th Corps, was satisfied with Utah's progress, having penetrated 6 to 8 kilometers inland. He ordered his troops to dig in for the night while preparing for the upcoming push toward the port of Cherbourg. In contrast, progress from Omaha remained slow. The bocage country, dense hedgerows and sunken lanes, created natural defensive lines for the Germans. By evening, U.S. forces had only just liberated coastal villages such as Colville and Saint-Laurent, reaching the outskirts of Formigny. British and Canadian troops moved faster across the flatter terrain. Canadian forces at Juno advanced nearly 12 kilometers, making them the deepest Allied penetration on D-Day. They seized Carpiquet airfield near Caen, but halted due to lack of flank support. Meanwhile, British forces from Gold Beach linked up with the Canadians at Juno by dusk, creating a continuous beachhead nearly 20 kilometers wide across the eastern sector. However, a gap still remained between the Americans at Omaha and the British at Gold. Key towns like Bayeux, Carentan, and Saint-Lô, all crucial to linking the fronts, remained under German control. Despite that, the Allies achieved important strategic objectives. At Gold Beach, British forces liberated Arromanches, where they would later install the Mulberry Harbor, a massive artificial port that would become vital for Allied logistics in the weeks to come. At Sword Beach, though Caen remained in German hands, the British had secured coastal villages and anchored their right flank firmly thanks to the reunion with the Airborne bridgehead. As night fell over the English Channel, the largest amphibious invasion in human history came to the end of its first day. After hours of brutal combat, the Allied forces had held their ground on French soil. The beaches of Normandy, once engulfed in smoke, chaos, and gunfire, were now scenes of devastation, silence, and exhaustion. Hundreds of scorched landing craft lay wrecked along the shoreline. Burned-out vehicles were scattered across the sand, tangled in barbed wire, iron obstacles, and debris. Next to the fallen, medics and field nurses rushed to treat the wounded. In the dim glow of flashlights, surviving soldiers dug shallow trenches, stacked ammunition and rationed supplies unloaded from ships offshore. Gunfire still crackled sporadically in the distance as isolated German strongpoints were mopped up, but overall, the intensity of battle had eased. One thing was clear by dusk: the Allies had secured a foothold on the continent. On the German side, Adolf Hitler finally accepted that this was not a diversion. It was the long-feared invasion of the Western Front. But by then, it was too late. German command had been in disarray all day. Reinforcements were hastily mobilized through the night of June 6th, tasked with defending key towns deeper inland like Carentan, Bayeux, Saint-Lô, and Caen, in hopes of sealing the gaps between the Allied beachheads in the days to come. Still, the German objective for the night was no longer to repel. It was to survive. The goal of throwing the Allies back into the sea on the first day had already failed. June 6, 1944 ended in a decisive strategic victory for the Allies. The cost was staggering. Over 10,000 Allied casualties, including more than 4,400 confirmed dead. But the mission had succeeded. The beachhead was real, it was stable, and it was growing. That day, more than 155,000 Allied troops, American, British, Canadian, along with thousands of vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces, had landed safely on the shores of Normandy. The opening phase of Operation Overlord was complete, and a corridor into Europe had been breached. That evening, many soldiers fell asleep right where they had fought. Some slumped over their rifles, others lay atop their backpacks in shallow pits dug hurriedly into the sand. Their eyes stung from gunpowder, their hands still clenched around their weapons. In their hearts was a storm of emotion, the ache of loss, the weight of survival, and the quiet pride of knowing they had done what the world needed them to do. On the distant horizon, flares still pulsed above the surf. But the sky over Normandy was no longer choked with death. The worst of the day's carnage had passed. And yet, the war was far from over. Ahead lay counterattacks, burning hedgerows, shattered villages, and cemeteries not yet dug. But whatever came next, June 6, 1944, D-Day, had already carved its place in history. Not just as a military operation, but as a profound testament to human courage, sacrifice, and the pursuit of freedom. It marked a turning point in World War II, a day when the tide began to turn, and the liberation of Western Europe truly began. In the years that followed, the world would not forget the price paid on those blood-stained sands. The beaches where thousands fell would forever be remembered, not by their code names, but by a title that speaks to what was won there: the beaches of freedom.